have you ever been impacted by a really silly disagreement? You know, like the stupid ones? Like, I'm about to tell you something right now that you might march me out of the room for. Like, you might say, Chad, we really liked you for a while, but we need to find somebody different, find somebody better, because this is going to flabbergast some of y'all. And I say this joking, but I also know there's going to be at least one person in there that's like, he just went down a couple rungs in my book. I don't like Johnny's Pizza. Yeah, it's legitimate, isn't it? Okay, but for the sake of the experiment, you ready for this? Is there anybody else in the room that does not, I'll eat Johnny's, trust me. Like, I can get from my house, I can be in a Johnny's parking lot so fast, I don't have to buckle my seatbelt. Like, it doesn't ding. Like, I can get there before the dings start. Yeah, that's the way. Buckle it that way. Like, trust me, I will eat some Johnny's. But I don't like Johnny's that much, okay? All of you who are flabbergasted and are judging me right now, who all in the room does not care particularly for Johnny's? Okay, you ready for this? Y'all ready? Watch this. Okay, everybody, keep your hands raised. Who does not particularly care for Johnny's actually grew up in the Monroe area or North Louisiana? Y'all see that? That's our experience, what we grew up with, right? Meredith and I actually have a very fun disagreement consistently that we finally solved. But we went to the movies a couple nights ago, and we went up to order, I like movie snacks. That's the best part, right? And so I go up there, and I order a large popcorn, and I order Meredith a small popcorn. You know, one time, we have a popcorn problem in our household, because we have very differing strategies of eating popcorn. Like, I love popcorn, especially when it's hot, and I want to eat it when it's hot. And if you've ever gone to the movies with me, you've seen me do it. I'm going to try to eat all that popcorn during the previews before the movie starts. Because the second it's cold, I don't want it anymore. And I have it's like a waterfall approach. Meredith's dad has the exact same one. You marry your father thing. Like, Ronnie eats it the same way I do. Meredith likes to enjoy her popcorn throughout the entire movie. And so at one point in time, we tried a couple different things. At first, we tried just having one large popcorn, like when you're younger and you're dating and it's kind of cute and your hands will accidentally touch, like that whole thing. So we did that for a while, but then we realized that's not going to work anymore. Then we tried, I would order the large, because I don't even finish the large popcorn, but I want to have the possibility of that much popcorn if it still stays hot that long. Then one time I got a large popcorn and then asked for a junior soda to give Meredith her own popcorn, but that wasn't good either. Then one time, the first time I think we actually ordered, I want a medium popcorn and a small popcorn. And the little girl behind the counter said, if you just get a large, you'll save 50 cents. And one of the two of us, I'm not going to tell you which one of the two of us just flat out told the person behind the counter, we don't share well. Like, silly disagreements, right? Silly disagreements. But there's also serious disagreements. Okay, think about when serious disagreements can have just detrimental effects. Now, I thought a lot about disagreements this week, and we're going to talk about them, but this is the problem that I found with so much, is that disagreements are difficult because they might lead to division. A lot of people will look at our landscape right now, and they will see us as a divided people. And I think they're right. We're not going to talk about that this morning, so relax. We're not going to have that conversation. But think about the disagreements. They are difficult because they can lead to division. What we're going to talk about this morning is division. And there's no greater example of what leading a divided life looks like than if we look at the nation of Israel after the time of King David. So you have a country made up of 12 tribes. They're all one big happy family. And after King Solomon dies, the nation splits into two. And 10 of the tribes take the north, and they call themselves Israel. And 2 of the tribes take the south, and they call themselves Judah. So they argue over who their king is. Like, the whole thing started over, who's going to be our king? So we'll disagree and divide over this. And then dividing happened. Well, where is it proper for us to worship the Lord at? Where is it proper for us to worship God at? Well, some people say Jerusalem. Well, you think you're better than us. We can worship God up here. And so this division, and you slowly, over the course of only about 150 years, you see this group of people that are they're kinfolk, that they're deeply divided, with a deep hatred towards each other. And it leads to very, very gnarly things. Over the course of the next month, we're going to do a series on the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. And really, we're not going to be looking at the kings so much, but the stories of division, but also stories of doubt, stories of disagreements, but stories of determination, and of the people who shaped and attempted to bring Israel back together as a unified people. They're divided. And I think there's no verse in Scripture that really shows this more in the book of Kings than this. In some ways, this is kind of the center text for us to think about this morning. But I also, the more and more I've read Kings over these last few months, I think this verse right here is maybe the center of the entire two books. And this is what it says. 1 Kings 18, verse 21. Then Elijah stood in front of them and said, "How much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him." But the people were completely silent. Just think about that. Think how strong those words have to be. How much longer will you hobble? Will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? So what had happened at this point in time was Elijah, this prophet, the nation of Israel had begun following this other god named Baal, and they had adapted his worship practices into the worship practice of the Lord, and all sorts of stuff like snuck in that God has spent just years telling us, don't do this, don't do whatever you do, don't do this, whatever you do, don't do this. And to do this started creeping into who they were. And Elijah now is at the point where all of Israel and 450 prophets of Baal, like priests of Baal, and the king courts, and all these people are now gathered together at this place called Mount Carmel. Because Elijah has called them to finally settle who is really in charge. So how much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? Hobbling is interesting. This word only shows up twice in the entire Old Testament, and it's in our reading today. And it means a couple of different things. It's the idea of intentionally crippled. Most often, this word was used to describe when a nation came in and conquered and invaded another nation, and the war horses that the nation had tried to defend itself with, they would cut their tendons of their legs, they would hobble them, they would intentionally cripple them just enough to where they were no longer effective as war horses, but they could still be used for farming. And so this conquered nation has to use what used to be its prized war machines, the center of their military-industrial complex, and now they're plowing fields with it to grow grain that they're going to have to pay in tribute to their captors. How much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? The word finds its actual structure, though, defining the crooks of a tree, like the forks of a tree. And there's another word for crutch. These things that provide us false stability because we no longer have the ability to be stable on our own. It's like a person has a crutch under each armpit. How much longer will you waver, hobbling between two opinions? How much longer will you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, trying to figure out what you're going to trust? So the issue wasn't so much that they had completely followed another God, it's the fact that they had halfway followed another God. And they were halfway following Yahweh. And whoever seemed to be the most convenient at the time, they would just simply bounce back and forth and back and forth. So you think about Elijah. In a moment, we'll discuss really who Elijah is and how powerful he is. When he's a lone man, he's the only one left standing there and telling an entire nation group of people, how much longer will you waver, hobbling back and forth between two opinions? How much longer will you be willfully divided in your devotion to God? And it's a dangerous thing. So this morning we're going to do something a little bit different. And I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I finally realized I think that this was the passage of Scripture to try out this experiment. Because this is like a movie scene that we're about to read here. This is the Thunderdome of the Old Testament. And there's so much stuff going on. And I want us to do as much as we can to find a way to put ourselves in this place as we listen and as we hear this story. And then we're going to think about how we can apply that and how we can bring that into our lives now. And so just imagine to take yourself back to what that might have looked like 3,000 years ago in this scene of what's going on. And we're going to jump back in chapter 18, verse 22 through 25. And Elijah said to them, I'm the only prophet of the Lord who is left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Now bring 2 bulls. The prophets of Baal may choose whichever one they wish and cut it into pieces and lay it on the wood of the altar, but without setting fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood of the altar, but not set fire to it. And then call on the name of your God, and I'll call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by setting fire to the wood is the true God. And all the people agreed. And Elijah said to the prophets, you go first, for there are many of you. Choose one of the bulls and prepare it and call on the name of your God, but do not set fire to the wood. So Elijah's here, he's baiting them in. He's even telling them, I'm going to let you go first. How about this? I'll let you have pick of the litter. I'll let you pick your own wood. I'll let you pick your own bull. I'm going to do every single thing I can do to set you up for success. The single man standing against thousands. A group of people who would like to see nothing else than Elijah lose, and then Elijah lose his life. We pop back in verse 26. So they prepared one of the bulls and placed it on the altar. And they called on the name of Baal from morning until noontime, shouting, "O Baal, answer us." But there was no reply of any kind. They danced, hobbling around the altar that they had made. About noontime, Elijah began mocking them. "You'll have to shout louder," he scoffed. "For surely he is a god. Perhaps he is daydreaming or relieving himself." Seriously, there's like potty humor in the Bible. Did you know that? Or maybe he is away on a trip or is asleep or he needs to be awakened. So they shouted louder, and following their normal custom, they cut themselves with knives and swords until the blood gushed out. And they raved all afternoon until the time of the evening sacrifice, but still there was no sound, no reply, no response. Just imagine what that was like. I mean, hours of that. Just the hollering and the screaming and the carrying on and the attempting to control God, the attempting to ask him what's going on. And then Elijah's just like taunting them. Isn't that fun? Like maybe he's not around. Maybe he's in the bathroom. Maybe he's in the bathroom. Maybe he's on a trip. Like Elijah is doing everything he can to like humanize Baal. Like where's he at? Like why is he not doing this? What's going on? Why? I mean, he's just taunting them over and over and over. But there's some stuff going on that's underlying in this story that we kind of have to back up and realize. Remember how I told you that Elijah was powerful, that he already had a reputation? Well, he kind of showed up in the middle of nowhere and just popped up all of a sudden. A couple of chapters back, he walked into King Ahab's courtroom and says, "Hi, I'm Elijah the Tishbite. BT dub, God said I have power and you're not going to have rain until I say so again." And 3 years later, there's not been rain. Like Elijah popped in, dropped the bomb, then peaced out and hid in the woods for a while. And then he couldn't hide in the woods anymore, so he found somebody else to hide out with. And he shows back up. This is the first time the king has been looking for him for years because there's not been any rain. And also Baal, so this Baal thing they're doing, Baal is a very specific god. He was the god of fertility, and he was a god of thunder and of storms. So as these people are seeing their land turn into this agricultural wasteland with no food, just starving, famine, the whole 9 yards, this God that they have kind of hobbled towards for support should be the one who can help them the easiest. And he's not. So Elijah's mocking their God's one ability he has. And you've got to think about this. After 3 years of all of this, I imagine these people are getting desperate. You see, later on in the afternoon, they realize, well, us just calling out to Baal hasn't worked. Let's start cutting ourselves now. Like, let's start doing this. Let's start doing this. Let's start doing this to try to get the attention of our God. They're bargaining with God. Do you see how dangerous that might be? Just trying to do every single thing they can do to get him to pay attention to them. Think about that. They're cutting themselves to get God to pay attention to them. So after some time, things begin to change. Verse 30. Then Elijah called to the people, "Come here." And they all crowded around him as he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. And he took 12 stones, one to replace each of the tribes of Israel. And he used the stones to rebuild the altar in the name of the Lord. And then he dug a trench around the altar, large enough to hold about 3 gallons. Remember the whole drought, no rain thing? Large enough to hold 3 gallons of water. He piled the wood on the altar, he cut the bull into pieces, and he laid the pieces on the wood. And he said, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour the water over the offering and the wood." And after he had done this, he said, "Do the same thing again." And when they were finished, he said, "Now do it a 3rd time." So they did it as he said, and the water around the altar ran around the altar and even filled the trench. It's a very, very different story that Elijah is telling them. He's coming in, he's repairing what had been divided. The altar of 12 stones for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. He had come in and he said, "We're going to fix things first." He called the people, he said, "Come to me." Think about that. He's not banishing them away from him. He's not saying you don't have the right to see this. You don't have a right to be part of this. He asked them to go get the water for him. These people who had been divided and not worshiping God, he was now inviting them to participate in this action. Inviting them to come and be part of what God is going to do. He's saying, no matter where you have been just 10 minutes ago, you have a place at what God's doing right now. You have a place here. You were wanted to be here. You don't have to worry about not being included in what's going on. He wants to just remove any sort of doubt in people's minds about what might happen next. We finish in verse 36. And immediately, the fire of the Lord flashed down from the heavens and burned up the wood and the stone, the dust. It even licked all the water in the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell down, face down on the ground and cried, "The Lord, he is God. Yes, the Lord is God." And then Elijah commanded, "Seize all the prophets of Baal. Don't let a single one escape." So the people seized them all, and Elijah took them down to the Kishon Valley, and he killed them there. Do y'all see what I'm saying? Now this story is just wild. It's just nuts. And it ends in a way that we typically would not think it would. I mean, this is the ultimate story of reconciliation in the Old Testament. God's saying, no matter what you did, you belong here with me. No matter what's been going on, no matter what your wavering or your hobbling has looked like, no matter what, you have a place with me. And this is not about trying to do crazy things or trying to bargain with God or trying to trick God into listening and paying attention with what they're doing. This is Elisha just comes in and he just says simple truths. And you see Israel turn back and realize what's going on. To turn back in magnificent ways and in big, huge ways. And this story, I hesitated to read the last verse. I felt like we needed to finish the story. We're not going to talk about, I'm not going to tell you right now, if you don't pay attention, you're going to get slaughtered in the Kishon Valley. Yeah. Well, we had to finish the story. We had to realize the hobbling, the back and forth that was going on. But inside of the story, I think that the biggest message for us as we think about what does it mean to be double-minded or to be single-minded, I think there's a lot of truths that help us out in simple ways and in ways that are easily approachable, in ways that I see the conversations that I have with you and with other people that I think they're healing places inside of this. There are better ways for us to understand what does it mean to relate to God, what does it mean to relate to the people that we live with. The power of just being simply single-minded in our devotion. 3 things for us to think about today. And the first one is this. We need to realize our own participation in being double-minded. Now think about this. Think about what do you do when you're really stressed out? And I think we all realize that when we get nervous, when we get anxiety, or when we begin to get depressed, there are dangerous things that we can allow to enter our old worldview. I know that a lot of times when I have a really, really long day, I want to order a not Johnny's pizza. Like, does anybody else in here stress eat? I'm going to raise my hand really high. Okay, think about that. I mean, how do we show the ways that we cannot cope with what causes us anxiety? That's a step of double-mindedness that many of us don't realize. What does it mean to look at stress in a healthy way? Where do we look for support? I think we also realize what does it mean when we feel the tension to be double-minded. We have to ask ourselves the question, are we being generous? Are we so nervous about something right now that we're relying on our own power, relying on our own abilities, and relying on our own resources, and we're hoarding those in case something bad happens? Or do we realize that what we have and our call is to be part of a larger community? Think about this. What if when we get nervous and we begin in this idea of self-focus and finding the solutions ourselves, what if what we're actually doing is just simply not having the space for faith to act in our life? Think about it that way. If you think you've got your life completely under control, are you leaving room for God inside of that? What does it mean to always be in a situation where we feel like we're going to have to need a little bit of help to pull this off? And I find that when we're doing that, we're creating a space for faith to act and to work and for us to grow towards God in that direction. The second thing that we need to realize that we do when we're acting double-minded is that we need to ditch a bargaining relationship with God. Okay, how many times have you been caught in a pickle and you're like, if you'll just do this one for me? I've told you some of this before. I think that one of the most penultimate moments of my life was a bargaining issue with God. And I think that there's some times where we hit like rock bottoms, where we hit these new realities and we take severe inventory of our own personal self. And I don't think that's bargaining so much, but I'll tell you, the time that I think I grew up the most was I was 23. I was in my second senior year of college. I was on year 5 of year 7 of college. And I realized I woke up at 2:30 in the morning and realized I had not paid a $10 bowling fee for a bowling class and was going to get dropped. Well, the issue was I was already on academic probation for not getting enough hours the previous year. And if I would have gotten dropped from bowling class, I would have gotten thrown out of the university for failure to maintain full-time status. And I woke up and realized what was going on. And let me tell y'all what, my prayer life got really good really quick. And luckily, I had a teacher who thought it was humorous that I was 2 years older than her and she was teaching college. And she was, oh yeah, no problem whatsoever. I haven't turned the form in yet. So I paid my $10 bowling fee. I got to stay in bowling class and I got to gain my hours and stay back in school. Which is a silly story, but I realized like that night, I grew up because that was probably the first time in my life I realized how important responsibility is. But there's ways that when we can be in consistent bargaining relationships with God, and that can get very dangerous. We're always like, well, if I'll do this, will you do this for me? Well, I'll do this, will you do this for me? If we act like a toddler towards God. That's being single-minded means we have ditched a bargaining relationship with God, because bargaining relationships are typically just us thinking that we can negotiate a better deal than he can come up with. It's us saying, I think I know as much about this as you might know. So will you let me roll with my idea for once? The third thing to think about is this, that we need to simplify our relationship with God. We make faith far more complicated than it needs to be when we're double-minded. We also introduced the place where we can get very angry at God when we're playing this game. We're like, I feel like I did this right, and I did this right, and I did this, and I started doing this, and I quit doing this, and I thought about adding this in once a week. We feel like we have a bunch of credit that we need to cash in, and that means God should let things go our way for a while. That's still us hobbling back and forth between two opinions, saying we've got this right, and you don't necessarily have this right. Or sometimes we feel like we can get in super legalistic situations. We just need to simplify it. Stop trying so hard. God's not asking us to cut open wounds into our flesh and for blood to spurt out to call him to come and be active and involved with our life. He's promised us that from day one, from the very get-go. That we don't have to convince him to be a part of what our life is like. We simply just have to open ourselves up to him and be there. See, double means divided. And divided means done. That the bedrock of our faith, the bedrock of what we have, is a foundation with Jesus. A relationship with Jesus is based off of single-mindedness, of us knowing who he is, of us knowing what he is capable of, and of us just simply trusting him. He says, I've come so you may have life, and that you may have life abundantly. And he's offered us this from the get-go.